Jonathan, can you share your slides?
Hello, I hear something. Yeah,
Yes.
great. It's lovely to be here for this and with such a good group of people because I've been looking through and I recognize many of the names, so that's great. What I want to talk about is how to apply the concept of the entrepreneurial ecosystem to the analysis of regional policy. And that's what we are trying to do at the OECD. So of course, we get asked by governments to assess their entrepreneurship policies and to make recommendations. And key questions are what's influencing the generation of impactful starts and scale-ups? And of course, which policy levers, that's the key question, which policy levers can be used to improve performance? And it is recognized that the regional level can be important. And it's not, I wouldn't say that that was something that was that would come straight away, but many policymakers will recognize that the regional level has an importance. We need before going off and doing regional studies, we need to have a conceptual framework and a systematic approach so that we do the same thing in each region that we go to, and so that our work's theory based and comparable. So we are using the entrepreneurial ecosystem concept, and I'll quickly take you through what that concept is for us. And then some findings briefly of using this framework, and then some observations on the potential strengths and weaknesses of this framework for regional policy development. So the framework as we're using it is coming largely from Stam, who of course worked with Spiegel. So I think we could say it's a Stam and Spiegel framework. And they published, around 2015, this sort of thing. The entrepreneurial ecosystem is made up of elements, and there are 10 elements in the ecosystem here in blue. So the connectivity, the business support services, knowledge, finance, demand, talent, leadership. We're calling those access to resources. And then we have the formal institutions, the culture, the networks that we're calling institutions. And these should then impact on what we call productive entrepreneurship, i.e. impactful, i.e. survivable, not sole one employee businesses that displace others, but productive entrepreneurship in terms of innovative starts and scale-ups. In terms of quantitative indicators, these are the sorts of examples of the quantitative indicators used for benchmarking. The governance, quality of governance database, the new firms per population, and so on. The use of this framework, we've applied it in Poland and published in 3 regions in Poland. We've applied it in the UK and published 2 reports in the UK. We're just about to publish one in Chiang Mai and Chiang Rai in Thailand, and further cases are coming. The methodology, there's the quantitative benchmarking. And what we do is we always benchmark the regional ecosystem against others in the same country. And if we can do, we will benchmark against other regional ecosystems in different countries. Then the most important part is probably this, the stakeholder interview program with policymakers, HEIs, large firms, entrepreneur organizations, training organizations, cluster organizations, and so on. 25, 30 interviews, 1 hour, 1.5 hours, some focus groups, possibly brainstorming workshops, a stakeholder interview program to get their insights, a workshop to discuss the report and the report itself. So that's what we're producing and what we need the conceptual framework for. So here are some examples of the results. Essentially, what we're doing is looking for the bottlenecks in the system or the weak links in the system. So here in one of the columns, we've got the 2 UK regions, and in the other column, we've got the 3 Polish regions. And I'm just highlighting some of the bottlenecks that came up and where they did not come up. So connectivity infrastructure was not a major issue in these 5 regions, although there was some small discussion of broadband access in Leamington Spa, where they have a digital cluster. Business support services were well supplied. Knowledge, well supplied in the 2 UK regions, but nevertheless a bottleneck in Poland with the commercial level of HEI research in Poland not being ready, and with a lack of engagement between academia and industry in all of the Polish regions. Finance was an issue, a bottleneck, early stage mezzanine. Cambridge was identifying an increasing concentration among a smaller number of angels as a potential threat to what's otherwise a very healthy finance scene. Then we've got, there are these 10 elements. Demand, not much coming out on demand. Talent, lack of technical and digital skills, mismatch between training offer and business needs, digital skills shortages, clearly problems with talent. With leadership, we noted a problem of limited public sector involvement in ecosystem leadership in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, for example. So I'm just really trying to show you how we're using the framework and what we're trying to pull out of it. Entrepreneurial mindsets were a problem in parts of the UK cases in Coventry, not Warwickshire, in Peterborough and the Fens, not Cambridge. In Poland, entrepreneurial mindsets an issue. Overall, HEI engagement with entrepreneurship an issue. Lack of corporate entrepreneurship, the large firms not running incubators as per JLR in Coventry. And networks, I mean, lots of networks in Cambridge, but a lack of funding for the operational tasks of the cluster organizations and a limited openness of the networks. And in Poland, you might call it social capital, a lack of trust among firms, little HEI small firm interaction. So this enables us to make some detailed policy recommendations for each region, having identified the bottleneck and the priority. And we can also bring in international inspiring policy practices from other countries on how to address these bottlenecks. But the real thing that I wanted to get into was what are the relative strengths and weaknesses of using this entrepreneurial ecosystem framework for the type of policy analysis that we wish to do. So some strengths is its focus on productive startups and scale-ups. So that's a strength because, you know, it's important that there's impact from this type of entrepreneurship. And it gives us a systematic approach so that we can take the same framework in each region. it's holistic. So it's not seeking to recommend a silver bullet single policy action. And that, of course, is something that we do get asked to recommend to governments is a silver bullet. Maybe they believe that a regional innovation center will solve all the problems. So, of course, you can use this framework to point to the multifaceted nature, and it identifies bottlenecks. So this is all on the plus side. And then, you know, when using this framework in these places, the things that we felt perhaps weren't going so well, the quantitative benchmarking, you're getting broad indicators for the benchmarking. There was the table where I showed the sorts of measures, you know, like the percentage of the population with tertiary education as a measure of skills. These are broad brush. They're proxies, really. Demand being GDP per capita in the region. It's not getting at the issue of what the potential blockage is to entrepreneurship, I would argue. And then there are some issues in the framework that are more about national conditions than the regional ecosystem that we're investigating, like business regulation. Then there's the difficulties of spatial disaggregation. In the benchmarking we had to cover East Anglia. So we had to bring in Norfolk and Suffolk, in addition to Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. Which themselves are probably different regional ecosystems. So we were obliged by the data to use regional units that were not the most appropriate. And then, of course, we're missing what's available next door. In Cambridge, you can access finance and business services from London, but that doesn't come up in our quantitative benchmarking. Then there's also this issue that I've alluded to about how different ecosystems are contained in the same regions. We're going to the administrative region as requested by the government responsible for that region. So it's the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority, but that combines a high-tech cluster, a new town in Peterborough, and an agricultural area, the Fens, and it excludes London, which you could say Cambridge is an integral part of. Mazovicia, that combines the capital city and rural land, rural areas around it, really very similar to a remote rural area. Coventry is a city in the West Midlands conurbation, and Warwickshire is a rural county just outside. And then there's the question, well, is this actually applicable, this concept applicable to weak regions where there are few startups, few scale-ups, and lots of important bottlenecks? Is it actually even applicable to those places? Then there's the sector question, because the regional entrepreneurial ecosystems seem to include several separate sector ecosystems. In Coventry and Warwickshire, we focused down on automotive and digital. In Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, we've got 4 strategic sectors. 3 are science-based and 1 is engineering-based. And there seem to be differences in the policies that you need for these different sector ecosystems. So should we actually be doing separate sector ecosystem studies in each region? Should we study sectors, not regions? Should we nest sectors and region studies? Then the link between the policy input and the policy output, that's what we're really concerned at the OECD. What's the link? If you put in a policy, what's the impact on startup and scale-up performance? And what's the impact then on productivity, employment, and transition? And it's a complex system, so it's not clear which ecosystem variables make an impact. And it's not clear that policy can actually make an impact in some of these areas like demand, connectivity, culture. It's not clear that policy has levers available. Here's a couple of other things, you know, what maybe we would want to see in the framework that's not there. Would be an explicit focus on large firms and higher education institutions as anchors. They're not down as any of our 10 elements. Policy capacity in the region is not down as one of our elements, but the ability to gather local intelligence, to mobilize stakeholders, to evaluate policy is surely very important. And then there's this question, should we take a wide view of entrepreneurship? Or are we right with startups and scale-ups? Or should we be looking at the entrepreneurial firm or the entrepreneurial employee as well? And the large firms, should they be brought in? Could they be brought in to this framework, which I think was designed with startups and scale-ups in mind? So that's a bit of a tour of what we're doing and some questions about the applicability of the concept. In conclusion, I would just say that a data-driven approach is not sufficient. We've seen from our work that you really do need rich stakeholder views as well. That the ecosystem elements or pillars might not be completely right for what matters to entrepreneurship and can be actioned by policy. And then these calls to include HEIs and large firms as anchors in the framework, and to look at policy capacities as well for strengthening the ecosystem. So thank you very much for listening and look forward to your thoughts.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Jonathan. Okay, I can see some hands up. So I'll go to the people with microphone first and then come back to some of the comments. Would you like to, so Michaela, would you like to kick off?
Oh, well, thanks for me. I was actually just clapping to say that was a really, really great presentation, Jonathan. Thank you for that. It's actually some of the questions I've been asking myself for the past 3 or 4 years. And I think it's really helpful to have some data on the framework and how it works, but also maybe what are some of the deficiencies. I don't think I actually have a specific question other than maybe say, what's your thinking about the difference between sector agnostic and industrial ecosystems?
I think that but organizations like the OECD and the World Bank for a long time held that free markets have got to be allowed to operate and that you cannot pick winners, you know, and I don't believe that they hold that position anymore, or that the governments of the organizations hold that position. You've clearly got industrial strategies, the UK industrial strategy, the Made in China, even the Germany Industry 4.0. The governments are not agnostic about sectors anymore. They're perhaps more careful not to subsidize large incumbents, but I think that sector intervention is important. And then the key question is, well, is something precise needed for particular sectors? Do you need a different scale-up policy in life sciences to ICT to creative industries? I think that there are indications that you do.
Thank you. Lola, have you got a question? I see your hands up. Lola.
Hi. I'm just, oh yeah, no, my video is working. Hi, Jonathan, thanks. That's really interesting to hear the work that you've been doing since we were last in touch a couple of years ago. I think it's probably following on from Michaela's question, really. So if you're talking about are there different sectors of ecosystems, how does that relate with, you know, industrial clusters, and does that not sort of blur the lines between a sector agnostic ecosystem and an industry specific cluster? Would you know, the automotive sector not just be a cluster rather than an ecosystem? I'm just really interested to hear a bit more of your views. And also I thought in particular the idea of you know, specific policies in regions. Obviously I can't remember what the point was I was going to make. Actually, I did make a note. Oh, we'll stick with the clusters and the ecosystem debates because that's an interesting one. Thank you.
Yeah, well, it's tricky, Laura, and it's tricky because we did once combine these projects and tried to run a project on local entrepreneurial ecosystems and emerging industries. And in fact, what I've done is split them, and now we're running a project on industrial transition, and we're running a different one on local emerging on local entrepreneurial ecosystems. That's just the internal cuisine. We're really trying to pick up regional innovation systems in one project, and all of the actors, and in another project focus on what affects startups and scale-ups, and a much stronger emphasis on entrepreneurship policy tools. And the cluster management organization is probably a key function for the industrial transition project. That you say, look, you need a cluster management organization to identify the collaborative projects in innovation and skills development, and you may need to reinforce them. You know, the thing is, in the other project, the entrepreneurial ecosystems, it's just really seeking to apply that to a region and to say, you've got these 10 elements, and they're the same throughout the region, and they're the same for all the sectors in the region. The priority is, you know, to build culture, or to build demand, or to build, you know, knowledge. And that should be applicable right throughout. And that should impact on startups and scale-ups. I think that we need to nuance that argument a bit more.
Really interesting, thank you. I can see Judith's hands up. Would you like to kick in?
Thank you very much, Jonathan, for this very interesting presentation. I was wondering, because you asked, well, we need to shift our focus, maybe, or extend our focus towards also entrepreneurship, entrepreneurial employees. I was wondering if we also need to shift in another way. When I think about the normative turn in research and innovation policies and think about mission orientation, shouldn't we then take into account and also assess the societal impact startups and scale-ups and entrepreneurs have? We think of mission-oriented innovation and research policies.
I think you should, because that's in the objective of government to go green and to go social. And so there's more value to startups and scale-ups that are green and social. I guess that we can include this in the standard entrepreneurial ecosystem framework.
Okay, so we've got some comments to Jonathan, to Ben Spiegel, and there is a comment from Ben Spiegel, but just because of the time, I'll kind of let you continue the discussion in the chat box. It's okay. There are some questions and comments, so I'll just leave Jonathan to respond in the chat box, if that's okay. And it's just really, really great sort of start of the session, and it's kind of good evolution of the concept as well as kind of policy thinking. So thanks very much to Jonathan, and apologies again for the audio issue at the start.